Well, for more, he's written about everything from Wittgenstein to Bob Dylan, from Poole in southern England. Constantine Sandis, professor of philosophy at the University of Hertfordshire, editor of Cultural Heritage Ethics Between Theory and Practice. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
My pleasure. Hi.
Is 2023 the year when the Parthenon Marbles return to Greece?
I'll have to see it to believe it. I'm not hugely hopeful, but it is looking better than past years. So fingers crossed.
The negotiations taking place discreetly between the director of the British Museum, who's none other than the former finance minister George Osborne, and the prime minister. Your thoughts on what's leaked out of those negotiations?
So the chairman, Osborne. So I mean, one thing that has leaked out is that there are still some remaining obstacles, and we know that in the past, that small print, those tiny details, things have fallen through before. So we'll have to wait and see. We don't really know exactly what these obstacles are. One thing that's appeared time and time again in the past is if it's billed as a loan, what that means about ownership. Past Greek governments haven't been keen on loans by and large because of the implication that it's not owned by them. It sounds like maybe they're going to bypass all this kind of language this time round of both ownership and loans and talk in terms of reunification. I think that would be a very good idea. But still, we don't know exactly if things are stuck, where they are stuck.
And this idea of an annex of the British Museum that would be at the Parthenon, is that realistic?
I've been arguing in favor of an annex of the British Museum at the Parthenon from before the New Acropolis Museum was built. Neither side liked it because on the one hand, a lot of people in Greece thought, well, this would mean that they are British. People in the British Museum or indeed in the UK didn't want them to leave Annex or not. I think it's actually a good compromise position. I think there are ways of doing partnerships between the BM and the New Acropolis Museum that can stay neutral on these more complicated legal and moral questions about ownership. So I think an annex is a good idea. And I think the main reason for this is that the argument for reunification is really first and foremost aesthetic. You have a work of art that's been torn not just in two, but in hundreds, thousands of pieces, including a few in the Louvre, as you know. And there's a real aesthetic argument for having everything, as much of it as we can, as close to each other as possible near the original site and temple.
It's an election year in Greece. If you're on the British side, do you negotiate knowing that if the left comes to power, they may tear up whatever agreement you reach?
I think you do. I think you do negotiate. Britain is not in a position to be worried about changes of government in other countries. I mean, things can change from one day to the next, as we know. I mean, I wouldn't even count how many ministers of culture we've had in the UK in the last few years. So I think that nothing would ever happen if you started worrying about things like that.
Well, you mentioned the Louvre, right? And whether it's the Louvre or the British Museum, you wonder if you give back one piece, do you then have to give back everything to everybody else? I noticed that the Vatican, in giving back their marbles, the Pope didn't give them to the Greek state. He gave them to the head of the Greek Orthodox Church. And that sort of enabled the Vatican to sort of bypass setting a precedent. Or did it?
That enabled a number of things, including a donation from one church to another church. I don't think the Vatican's worries were really slippery slope worries of that kind. Like I was saying earlier, we're talking here about freezes around one temple, and all agreements for loans discussed in the past have always had other artifacts being loaned to the British Museum, even donated to other museums. So it's not a case of Greece saying we want everything that's ever been taken for Greece back. That would be silly. Nobody has actually ever said it. And there are good reasons for having artifacts displayed in these world museums that tell a different story. So I don't think the slippery slope argument has ever really been a good argument. These things must be done on a case-by-case basis. The British Museum currently has thousands of Greek artifacts in storage that it doesn't even display. Greece is willing to give it even more. I don't think this is about repatriating everything that's been looted. I think this is about some, pieces that are integral to a wider whole.
And that need to be reunited after all these millennia. Constantine Sandis, many thanks for being with us from Poole.
My pleasure. Thank you.